Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative. This episode is sponsored by the Finest Service Organization, a provider of line-of-duty death loan protection through many of our POCUA institutions. Now welcome to part 2 of our discussion with the prosecutors. Brett, you want to chime in, or do you want to say what you did in the interview for Podcast Magazine? What Alice said?
Yeah, exactly what Alice said. I usually just say whatever Alice said, but no, I mean, look, I think facts are tricky things, and I think if you, and I don't totally get this, but there are very strong rooting interests, I'll say, so I'll put it that way, in true crime, where people in a particular case, I mean, say it's is this person innocent or not innocent? You have people who are just passionate about their innocence or passionate about their guilty in a way that sort of goes beyond just trying to figure out what the reality is. It becomes sort of a part of them, a personal thing. So when they see facts that challenge whatever that preconceived notion is, they don't want to accept those. They want to figure out a way to explain it away. You see this a lot. You'll get conspiracy theories, or you'll get, well, it must be police corruption. Right? Like if there's some fact that's really difficult for me, well, it's because the police are corrupt. Don't have any evidence of that, but everybody knows police are corrupt. So I'm sure that's what's going on here. And so you see that a lot. And the other thing is people have their own facts, right? Like it's amazing how often people will really believe something is true when it's demonstrably not true, but they've been told it so long, or they've read one of those clickbait headlines. And so they just believe it. And one of the things that we do is, a lot of times you'll have a clickbait headline and a story that takes a minute to read, and it's going to take us 30 minutes at least, maybe multiple episodes to explain why that is not actually true. We had earlier this year, we did some stuff on Miranda because there was a Supreme Court case about whether or not you could sue police for Miranda violations. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And you had all these headlines that were basically Miranda's been overturned. Now you don't have Miranda rights. And that just wasn't true. That was factually inaccurate. So we did a whole thing on how, no, this is actually what happened. And that thing that you've been told is not true. It is not a fact. And I think that is something that we view as part of our sort of mission out there. We do this for fun and we do it because it's entertaining, but we also want to at least try and give people access to more information. And if we give them that information and they go the other way, that's fine. But just giving access to sort of, let's look at the bigger picture here. Let's take a step back and explain how maybe that thing you read isn't actually true.
Yeah, sometimes maybe this is my cynical nature, but when I hear police corruption, and certainly there has been, I'm not naive to say that there hasn't been police corruption at times. But also, sometimes police are human and they have problems with facts and they get emotion. And I can think of at least 2 or 3 cases where they're so focused on the victim and what happened that in a human way they have blinders on. Not that they're corrupt or trying to do the wrong thing, but they're so emotionally tied to it that they're going down a path that they probably shouldn't go down. Going back to cynicism, because it's one of my favorite subjects. I talked to some of my cynical friends, and we have kind of this ongoing debate. Are most people stupid or are most people ignorant? I choose to believe, or try to force myself to believe, that most people are ignorant, that with the proper education, like in your case, the legal system, by listening to the prosecutors, people can lower their level of ignorance because they have the capacity to learn. So as you talk to some of your listeners and they come back to you with thoughts and questions, whether they be on social media or what have you, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you see or hear out there about the legal system?
Well, let me just say on the first part, I think in our experience, people really want to learn. And
Yeah.
I think this goes to the notion of how much people liked when we talked about the law. And people are passionate for that stuff. And it's sort of amazing how passionate they are for it, and how like thirsty they are for just some, basic sort of education on some of this stuff. And I don't blame them for not knowing it. I mean, a lot of this is complicated and they don't teach it. I mean, where are you going to hear this? It's not like they teach this stuff in school anymore, right? I mean, what's your basic civics class in high school like? Mine was my football coach telling stories about football games, right? I didn't learn any civics in high school.
Actually
And
sounds like a good class. I would have
it was a
liked to
great
take it.
class,
Yeah.
but if I hadn't gone to law school, I wouldn't know any of this stuff either. And so I think people are really passionate about learning stuff and finding out how the system really works. And I don't know what the biggest misconceptions are. I mean, we get a lot of questions about things like double jeopardy
Mhm.
and what and people don't really understand how juries work, and they don't really understand what people can and can't say in the courtroom. I mean, stuff like, most people have no idea that when you are trying someone and you've got a criminal case, you can't actually bring all the bad things they ever did before and put it in front of the jury. We're talking about 404B. I mean, that is
Mhm.
part of 404B, is you can't do that. And most people don't know that. And they think, and they're surprised by that. Right. And so just sort of, and I think sort of just educating people on how trials actually work and how evidence really comes in. Big misconception that circumstantial evidence is somehow inferior, right? I
Mhm.
mean, that's a huge one. People think, they hear circumstantial evidence and they think, well, this is just a circumstantial case. He's probably not even guilty. And we explain to people, no, circumstantial evidence is everything from DNA to fingerprints to anything other than I
Mhm.
saw the guy do it. And in many cases, it's better evidence because eyewitness accounts are often flawed,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that's a big one. And when people hear that, then they're less susceptible to people who try and convince them that this person was obviously, this was a just totally unjust conviction because it was all a circumstantial case, right? So stuff like that, I think, helps people understand, number one, how the system works, and number two, that it works well.
And everything Brett's describing, I think, are a lot of misconceptions about the legal system. And that all kind of, for what I've seen, bubbles into kind of one huge misconception, which is that the justice system is not just at all. The entire system is flawed and it should be completely just demolished. And we should start from scratch. And we address that head on because that is certainly a popular position to take these days. And we always push back and say, with what? Because it is
Mhm.
a human system. It will forever be flawed. But I will tell you this: we have in the United States, which is where we practice right now, has the best justice system really ever known in history. And there are always going to be problems, but it is not built on nothing. The founding fathers built it on years of trial and error throughout the common law system. And it continues to change and be shaped by the flaws. And, we try to give history and also context into why these rules exist and what they're trying to prevent, what sorts of injustices they're trying to prevent. And once you understand kind of the costs and benefits of each rule, because there's always going to be an externality to everything that you want to make a change to, and it's really been thought of, right? There have been, and these debates can continue, and we
Mhm.
always encourage people, those are changes that can be made. Vote with your feet. Go and vote for these people,
Mhm.
your local DAs and your legislatures who are writing these laws. But to say the entire system is just inherently broken and we need to start from scratch is actually, we have yet to find a single person who can come to us with a better system
Right.
from scratch. And so I think everything that Brett said really rolls into this idea that we can't fix the justice system. But the reality is, it's a human system. It cannot be perfect. It will never be perfect. But we can make it better. And that's what we've tried to do, in the American system.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And yeah, I think too, the last 2.5, 3 years of covering true crime, one of the things that I've noticed, just my opinion, I don't have any data on it, but just one of the things that I've noticed is there seems to be more wrongful conviction type of podcasts that come out. And some of them are very good and very accurate and very factual, Some of them are, in my opinion, a little bit borderline, that they're, yeah, maybe the person has a wrongful conviction, but the purpose is less about the story and more about trying to highlight, police issues or judicial issues and so forth. And I agree with you that we have probably the best justice system in the world, and that we need to continue to make changes to it. We can't let it set, but we can't just throw the whole thing out and start it from scratch. That would be literally insanity. To that point, I remember in one of the articles I wrote, which was on another great podcast like yours, it was called The Real Killer, which was a wrongful conviction and was very well done. But I actually looked up, and I forget the percentage, and I put it in that article, that there's a very, very, very low percentage of wrongful convictions of all of the cases, probably millions of cases, that our judicial system, has gone under. It's such a small percentage. Now, granted, for those people that were wrongfully convicted, that is a version of hell, but it's such a small percentage that we're going to go. I mean, Ted Williams would love to have that average of success. For that, we're going to make, wholesale changes, to what we got going on. I don't think that's right. So I completely agree with you.
Now, a word from one of the POCUA's proud business partners, OfficerPrivacy.com. OfficerPrivacy.com was founded by Pete James, a law enforcement professional with over 25 years of experience. Pete wanted to find a way to help law enforcement officers protect themselves and their families. So he formed a team to create a way to quickly identify and remove their information from certain sites. OfficerPrivacy.com is the result. This service is already offered through a select few of our POCUA organizations. As a listener of Public Safety Talk Radio, you can take advantage of a special offer from OfficerPrivacy.com. Go to officerprivacy.com/POCUA, and when you sign up, you'll get 2 additional bonuses. In addition to removing your personal information from the top 30 people search sites, they will give you your first 2 months of monitoring free. This is a value of $39.98. In addition to that, you'll receive a cell phone privacy device, a $19.99 value. This prevents data from leaving your cell phone when you use public charging stations and is a must when traveling. So go to officerprivacy.com/POCUA today to take advantage of this offer and to protect your privacy. Organizations who are members of the POCUA and are interested in offering the service directly to their members, contact us at POCUA@btcinc.org.
What do you think, in your opinion, is the best part of the American judicial system, especially maybe in comparison to other countries out there?
So I love the jury system.
Mhm.
I'm a big proponent of the jury system, which is not, it's one of those things that people always attack. People always like, juries are dumb. We shouldn't have juries. Just get rid of juries. And I always say to people, be careful before you get rid of this thing that is one of the most fundamental protections you have. I work for the government. I am part of the power of the state, right? And I have an army of police officers with guns who can come arrest you. And then I can indict you. And I can try and get you sent to prison for the rest of your life. But I can't do it unless 12 ordinary people off of the street from your community agree that we have met our burden. And to me, having this protection that prevents your government from just being able to be judge, jury, and executioner, I think is an amazing thing. In a lot of other systems, they have more professional type juries, or they just have judges. And I'm sorry, judges are great, but judges work for the government too. They get their paycheck from the government. And I think the fact that we have that system, as flawed as it may be, there's no doubt there are juries that get it wrong. And there are juries that let people go who we all think are guilty. I mean, that happens. But I will tell you from my personal experience, I think juries are very thoughtful. They really work hard to get to the right place. They take it very seriously. And I think everyone will tell you this, that's worked in a trial court, that juries work really hard. And to me, It is one of the very best things about our system.
Yeah, before we get to Alice, I'll comment on that. And, what's funny is I've never been on a jury. I haven't had a jury summons in I don't know, definitely years, maybe even decades. And I remember when I was ignorant, I was like, I don't want to do this. And I'd get these jury summons every once in a while. Yeah, now I'd actually welcome the opportunity to be on a jury, and nobody's sending me the letter. I mean, come on. But I think what some folks don't realize is that it's very common with police and the true crime world and so forth, is that your job is actually much tougher as a prosecutor than a defense lawyer. Is all he or she has to do is convince one person out of 12 that there's a reasonable doubt, and he or she has done their job. You have to convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt that this person is guilty and did it. I mean, if that isn't protection from, winding up in jail erroneously, I don't know what is.
Yeah, and the burden is on the prosecution, and we say this all the time. We say that is important, and we as prosecutors, we take that responsibility very, very seriously. It's not enough if someone is out there and you see them shoot someone else. They don't immediately get thrown into prison for an indefinite amount of time for murder. We still have to bring a case with all of our evidence, and they have a right to trial, even if 100 people watch them shoot someone, in broad daylight, and it wasn't self-defense. And so that is a really, really helpful thing that people forget. We take that burden very seriously, and I think the burden should be on us, because we are taking away your constitutional rights to liberty, and every single one of us are subject to the same rules. And that's my favorite part. My parents are immigrants, and I have family members who live in just about every continent in the world, and there are a lot of different judicial systems. And this is how, this is what I compare the American system to. I see what we are afforded, and I really do see that justice is blind here, despite, there are always going to be problems, and you can always seek to have a better judicial system. But I say that really truly here. Someone who came from immigrant parents who don't really even speak the language here can be an officer of the court, and I get to be, someone who appears in court and argue on behalf of other people who don't have voices. That's incredible. That is not something that's available to every barrister around the world. As long as you're willing to work hard and pass the test, you too can be a lawyer. It's available to anyone. And along those lines, any one of us can be a juror. That is our civic duty. That's incredible. Like we said, it's not just people who make an income, who make a certain amount of income, who have gone to have a high school degree. You could have no degrees whatsoever to serve on a jury. These are incredible things that it's really, the judicial system is for the people. And, despite a lot of attacks we hear in the media, Brett and I have prosecuted, I don't know how many cases, but we get file after file after file. And I can tell you that when we evaluate cases to bring, we are looking at the strength of the case. We're not looking at who we're going after. I don't care if this is a famous person or someone who has a lot of resources, or they have a family who donates a lot to the sheriff department. I don't care. I am looking to see if I have the facts to support a claim, and that this is a righteous prosecution. And if it isn't, we're not going to bring it. It doesn't matter who you are. And, we can only speak for ourselves, but really our experience in working with hundreds, if not thousands, of law enforcement and prosecutors from around the country, that's all I've come across. I know that there are going to be corrupt prosecutors or corrupt police or law enforcement out there, but we all have a role to play in that. And I am very lucky that in my career, I have yet to face an ethical quandary where I was asked to do something that I thought was unethical and unsupported by the law. And I think most people would say that that is their experience with the judicial system here. We should all be vigilant, of course, at all times. But, it's given me a lot of hope in the government and the judicial system that, my parents brought me to, and that I get to call home now.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great story, and I'm glad you had that journey. I'm glad we've got prosecutors like both of you out there, and it's my belief that while there is certainly corruption and also even stupidity on the police force and among prosecutors, that I'd like to think that 95 to 99% of the law enforcement and prosecutors out there are not only well qualified but well meaning in what they're doing. I often in a lot of this the true crime content, whether it's film, TV, podcasts, written word, whatever, is I always find, while some of my friends and family will say, well, why didn't they prosecute that? And I'll hear like a prosecutor say, well, we just don't have enough. And I appreciate that as a taxpayer, because I want you to go in completely prepared, knowing that you have a high propensity to not waste my tax dollars, to use those resources properly and to get a conviction. And to not just say, well, let's give this a shot. No, don't just give this a shot. It's like Yoda in Star Wars. Do or do not try. See, I even got a Star Wars reference in there. So, so as we close up here, I want to hear about this new podcast. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So this year we launched a second podcast, and unlike the Prosecutors podcast, which is an hour-long weekly podcast about a true crime story, it could be multi-series, but we're really delving into the story, the theories, and what we think happened in those cases. Legal Briefs is a 30-minute kind of hot takes on legal news and also on updates within the true crime community. So if something happens in a very hot case like Adnan Syed, and people don't understand why that motion was granted, what the actual effects of that motion being granted are, we're not talking about the story of what happened there, what happened to the victim, what happened with the perpetrator. We're actually talking about the legal developments in the case, and to help you become a more informed citizen to understand, why that is the case and what happens now. And we also delve into legal topics that people ask us about. They want to know about attorney-client privilege. They want to understand what the latest Supreme Court ruling means about, the border. And so we try to kind of demystify something that may seem like, oh, only lawyers can understand that. And to try and show people, actually, it's accessible to everyone, and we can explain it in 30 minutes.
Yeah, people like the nerd stuff so much, we created a nerd podcast. So.
Yeah, you wanted to create a podcast like the Prosecutors to educate the masses, and then they just clamored for something that was really, really down to the nitty gritty, to the minutia of the legal system, and you gave them that too. That's awesome.
Our favorite, a lot of our listeners joke that they have a prosecutor's JD, which I love. Listen, you can't take it to the bar, but
listen enough, maybe you'll get an honorary degree someplace. But you guys are awesome. Definitely, go out there and listen to the Prosecutors. Listen to Legal Briefs, of course, after you've listened to Public Safety Talk Radio. But listen to all three. Alice, Brett, thank you so much for taking the time out here.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been an honor.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thanks for what you do too.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. Definitely look Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Look for the Prosecutors. Look for the article on the Prosecutors in Podcast Magazine coming out in November. And I thank you, all of you that have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio. And we'll be back with you next week with another great guest.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. The POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, You and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.